Big topic of the day, college football as a major. Let me talk about college majors in general to start this off. So a little bit about myself. I'm a human and organizational development major. I'm either minoring in or double majoring in economics. I've taken enough courses in both of those fields that I think I have a decent understanding of what a college major is. And so to start this off, I want to define what a college major is. I went on all sorts of schools' websites. I checked UChicago, Stanford, Vandy, Brown. And I found out no schools have a concrete definition of what a college major is. And so I came up with one on my own. And my definition, it's a 4-piece definition. So there's 4 criteria that I consider are mandatory, or at least should be mandatory, for a field of study to count as a college major. And so I'll run through those 4 really quickly to start things off. First one is that a college major is a topic that somebody devotes himself or herself to in search of becoming an expert in the field. Now, expert is loosely defined there. Obviously, as an undergrad, you're not going to be a true academic pundit of any subject. That's more of a graduate study type thing. But an undergraduate major in any topic should be pretty knowledgeable and informed in what they're studying. They should be able to intelligently converse on whatever it is that they are majoring in. So that's number 1. Number 2, this one goes hand in hand with number 1, and it's that a college major requires a good deal of time devoted to that topic. In other words, college majors require time. 3, a college major should prepare somebody for related jobs, and there should exist related jobs in that field. This one's becoming a bit obscure, neglected, overlooked. A lot of college majors don't have jobs directly in that field, and they have more, I guess, soft skills that are kind of worked towards in those majors that could apply to many different jobs. And the 4th criteria I came up for what defines a college major, I said, college major has to be academic in nature. This one also, like number 3, it's becoming a bit obfuscated, not always followed, but I think an academic major should be academic. And so now I'm going to go into all 4 of these criteria for a college major in a little more detail, and I'm going to explain how football meets each one of these 4. I want you guys to tweet at me, though. Tell me I'm wrong and why. Am I missing anything in my definition of a college major? Or am I just overlooking the fact that maybe football doesn't fit into one of these criteria? Because, I mean, right now, I'm pretty adamant on my stance on this. I'm pretty stubborn on it. I do believe football should be a major, and so I'm going to get right into it. Number 1, a college major should require one to devote himself or herself to becoming an expert in that field. This one's even, I think it's hard to argue against. Football players are absolutely experts in football. Every single one of them has extensive knowledge, ability, confidence, and experience in football. And I mean, it's not just on the field, too. They know football operations, they know football strategy, play calling, rules. They understand effective coaching, leadership, teamwork, pretty much everything football related, they are experts in. This can't be said about other college majors to the degree that it can be in football. You think about an English major, if I'm looking for the number 1 student of it, or the number 1 person at English, I have a question about Shakespeare, I need someone that's good at writing, it might not necessarily be an English major. It's no guarantee that the best person at English is an English major. And that can be extended to almost every major. Think about communications. There are many people that might not be communications majors that are great at communicating, great at presenting and whatnot. Or Spanish. I mean, a lot of Spanish majors, they're not even fluent in the language. Football players, they are fluent in football. If you're looking for the top 1% of students in terms of football knowledge, it's going to be the football players. The people on a college campus that are most knowledgeable about football are, one, the coaches, who are essentially like the professors of football, and then the players, who are like the students. And that's not true for nearly any other major. History, if I have a question about Hitler, I mean, sure, maybe a history major is a little more likely than a sociology major to know something about Hitler, but a lot of these things, history, English, other languages, economics even, these are they're just general knowledge that's much more easily accessible, whereas football, you really need to be a player to be an expert in it. And so this one, I think it's easy to put a check mark next to it. Football players are absolutely experts in their field, much more so than most college majors. And so that's the first criteria for what is required to be a college major. You have to be an expert in it. I'm giving the check mark for football. All right, you're listening to JT and Zeke on West End. I'm Jimmy, aka JT. Zeke is not here today as he is on his way back for Thanksgiving. I'm in the middle of arguing why football players should automatically graduate with a major in football. I just went through the first component of my definition of a college major, and that is that college majors should be working towards expertise in their field, and I said football players are very much doing that. The second piece to my definition is that a major requires a great devotion of time to the field of study. This one is just ridiculous. Football players spend so much time in football. I mean, they deserve an undergraduate degree, a postgraduate degree, and add a PhD to it. So to become an economics major, like I said, I'm either an economics major or minor. To be an econ major, you need 33 credit hours in economics courses, 33 credit hours in the 4 years that you're here. So 4 years, that's 8 semesters. On average, you're going to be taking 4.125 hours per semester. Obviously, you're going to be taking 3 or 6 usually, just because one course is usually 3 hours. But just to simplify things, we'll say you're taking 4 hours of economics per semester. So an econ major, they take 4 hours per semester. Each semester is 15 weeks. That's a bit of an exaggeration because one of those weeks is exams. Sometimes it's a little less than 15. I think it's 14 and a half. But we'll round up because the numbers are going to work out anyways. So 4 hours a week, 15 weeks. That's 60 hours per semester in which you are spending in the economics classroom. 60 per semester. There are 8 semesters. That's a total of 480 hours in economics classrooms. Now, so I'm pretty studious. I study a lot for my classes, and I gave a very conservative, I guess, exaggerated estimate of how much time I would spend in an economics major. So I said for every hour of courses that I have, I study for 2 hours, 2 hours of homework and studying. That's an exaggeration. It's definitely more than the average student studies. It's more than I do. There's some courses that don't really require any homework. But we're going to round up here because when I talk about how much time football players spend in football, it's just going to blow away these numbers, even if I exaggerate the econ ones. So say for every 4 hours of economics you take in a semester, you study for 8 hours. So 8 hours of studying per week. And that's 12 hours of economics per week. And 15 weeks, that would make for, in 8 semesters, 1,440 hours of economics. So be an economics major, classroom time, and studying, we're going to say just under 1,500 hours devoted to economics. It's probably a lot closer to 1,000 hours, but we'll round up here. We'll say 1,500. Now, football players have practice plus film for probably like 3 hours a day, and then they work out for another hour. So that's 4 hours per day that football players are spending in football. And that's not even including the time they spend outside of mandatory workouts and such. So football players, though, unlike normal classes, football players, they're 6 days a week. They have practice pretty much every day, and they also have games on Saturdays. Game days, that's a lot more than 4 hours, but we're just going to round down. And so 4 hours per day, 6 days a week, that's 24 hours per week devoted to football. One semester, we'll stick with the 15 weeks, 24 times 15. That's 360 hours per week that football players are spending in football. That is 6 times the number of hours that an economics major would spend in a semester. Maybe during the off season, spring and summer, football players are spending half as much, maybe 180 hours per week. That's still 3 times as much as normal college majors. So, I mean, football players, they should be getting like 3 majors in football given how much time they're spending in it. I mean, imagine if you had to do a 3-hour mechanical engineering lab every single day of your undergraduate career on top of your normal lecture requirements. That's pretty much what football is like. You have 4 hours of football every single day, and that's on top of your other academic requirements, and they do not get any credit hours for football. And so it's pretty much like being an economics major and having a 3-hour like mechanical engineering lab or some random lab that takes up 3 hours every day that you do not get credit for. That's what being a football player is like. And I mean, the only reason the NCAA can get away with this is because the players usually love football. They love their teammates. It's too difficult to quit. And so that finishes up the second piece of my four-piece definition of a college major. It's pretty clear. Football requires an ample amount of time. So I'll give a check mark next to that one. So just to summarize so far, I have said that football players are experts in football and that football requires an ample amount of time. So let's get into the third piece of my definition of what qualifies for a college major. The third piece is that there should be related jobs to what you're studying, and your major should prepare you for said jobs. And so this one can be broken up. Earlier I said this one's being a little bit neglected. Lots of majors do not have jobs directly in that field. Unless, so like economics, you could be an economist, I guess. But generally, people that are economics majors do not go in something that's directly related to econ. They may go into something like finance, investment banking, in which economics knowledge definitely helps, but is not necessary. But in general, college majors either prepare you for a specific trade, or they prepare you with general skills that apply to a range of jobs. Football does both. There are way more jobs directly related to football than almost every liberal arts major. And most of these jobs require an amount of knowledge and experience that is like tantamount to the amount a player has. So essentially, if you want a job in sports, a lot of these jobs are reserved for former athletes, former football players, because they are the only people that truly know the culture, have the experience that is necessary for the job. And at the least, they're almost always qualified for it if they went through 4 years of football and are like relatively smart, well-rounded individuals. But as for jobs in football, the most obvious one is you become a professional player. Is that likely? No. If you're a college football player, the chances of going pro are about 2%. It's not likely. But football players in college are much more likely to go to the NFL than an economics major is to become an economist. And that's barely a job. You can be an economics professor. You can write economics. There's not that much you can do directly in it. And so it's actually more likely that you become an NFL player from college football than you do become an economist from economics. There's tons of other possibilities, though. You could be a football coach. You could be a head coach, offensive coordinator, position coach, really anything. You can be a talent scout, personal trainer. Football players are prepared to be analysts and something like sports talk or color commentators. There's all sorts of jobs in football operations. They could work in athletic departments, whether it be college department, high school department, even a pro football department. So football players very much prepared for all sorts of jobs that are directly related to football, maybe even sports agency. But then there's also tons of jobs that football players are just generally prepared for. So nowadays, most liberal arts majors, as I've mentioned, are geared towards general knowledge that could help in a myriad of fields. Football definitely fits under that also. So did some research. I went back to my HOD 1000 class with Dr. Brian Griffith, and so I'm going to cite him here. He made a list, and I'm not sure if he worked on it with anyone else, but he has a list of the top skills that employers look for in applicants, and he put them in order. So this is from Dr. Brian Griffith's Applied Human Development class. The 5 skills that employers want the most in order. 1, ability to work in a team structure. Yeah, football players most certainly have worked in teams. 2, ability to make decisions and solve problems. That one applies a little less. 3, ability to plan, organize, and prioritize work. Yeah, given their busy schedules, football players most certainly are good at organizing and prioritizing work, and they also do that within football. 4, ability to verbally communicate with others. Some players are better at that than others, but generally they have to be able to communicate verbally. There's lots of communication in football. It's not only verbal communication, but they are certainly good at communicating overall. And 5, they have to have the ability to obtain and process information. They're doing that constantly on the fly on the football field. So it's no surprise that employers love hiring former athletes, especially football players, because they have lots of the skills and experience, a lot of the soft skills and experience that employers are looking for. So football most definitely prepares people for jobs in related fields of football, but also fields outside of football. I mean, consulting, anything business related. Those places love athletes. And so this one, I'm going to give a check mark to this one too. I'd say there are many careers that are related to football, and that playing football in college most certainly prepares you for them. And in many cases, you have to have played football for these jobs. And so that's not that true. And for most jobs, you think about investment banking, it's not a requirement that you major in economics. It might help a tiny bit, but these investment banks mostly care about how you think. If you're very analytical and intelligent, they don't really care what you majored in. You could be a chemical engineer, you could be a psychology major. It doesn't really matter. If you're smart, they're interested in you. That's not necessarily true for these football jobs. football jobs, it's often required that you played a lot of football. That's the only way you can get this knowledge, since it's very specific. It's not easily accessible, as I said earlier, and it's usually not general knowledge. All right, and so now I'm going to step into the fourth criteria of what makes a college major. This one should be the most obvious, and yet it's a little bit overlooked, I'd say. But college majors, they should be academic in nature. I would argue that although music majors, dance majors, theater, art, pretty much all of the arts, they're not necessarily perceived as academic. All of those have some sort of academic component to them, especially music. There's tons of theory to it. I'm sure there's music theory, theater theory, dance theory, all of that. And so there's always an academic component to it, but most of these arts, they're academic to a degree. They're not overwhelmingly academic. Football is very academic. And this one, a lot of people might be turning their heads right now. Keep an open mind with this one, because football is hard. You may stereotype football players as not being the most intelligent, most bright individuals, but when it comes to football IQ, these guys are smart. And football is very academic. Have you ever studied a playbook? Those things, like in high school, I think my playbook was probably 50 pages offense, 50 on defense. I never fully grasped the thing. Those playbooks are so expansive, so extensive. You can always learn more and more. There's just so much to it, so many layers. Learning that playbook requires so much memorization. And it's not just memorization. You need to be able to apply it on the field, and you have to know it like it's second nature. And so studying playbooks, that is very academic. It is extremely difficult. I've been able to grasp just about all of my Vanderbilt classes. I've done well in them. Football playbooks, though, have never been that easy to me. So much in them, so many different plays, formations, schemes. You never know. There's just so many places you can line up, so many directions you can run in, and you need to know exactly how to act given how the other team is what the other team's formation and whatnot. Football is hard. And it's not just memorization. A lot of classes, you kind of memorize and regurgitate. That's never the goal. Usually the goal is you learn and you're able to apply it to something that you actually see in real life. Football, there's lots of playbooks, lots of film, lots of notes you take during film, and you apply these on the field. It's pretty much like you have a lab component, which is practice and games, and then you have a class component in which you're with the coaches. Coaches are explaining formations and whatnot, what they want out of the team. They're watching film. That's like the classroom component of it. And then what about the rules of football? Man, the rules are so complicated, so comprehensive. If there's a rule book for football, like an official rule book, the thing's probably an encyclopedia. There's no fan that knows every single rule in football. I mean, some of these things, they're so esoteric. Like, you'd need to make a concerted effort to pull out the rule book to know these rules. I mean, did you see that Richard Sherman hit? It wasn't this Sunday. It was the Sunday before against the Bills. Not the one against the kicker. That one was totally clean, in my opinion. And this other one was also totally clean. But Richard Sherman absolutely wrecked. He leveled number 19, a receiver who was probably 20 yards downfield. Just wrecked the guy. And everyone watching is screaming, "Oh, dirty player, dirty play. That's so unfair. Kick him out of the game. You cannot do that." Everyone's hollering. Everyone's upset and complaining about Richard Sherman. But no, that play was clean. That was eligible contact. Richard Sherman, he is a student of the game. Richard Sherman knows the playbook. Sorry, he knows a rule book better than the fans. He knows it probably better than the refs. Everyone was in shock when he hit number 19. But want to know what the rule says? The rule says if the quarterback, who was Tyrod Taylor in this case, if the quarterback leaves the pocket, then it is fair contact for Richard Sherman to hit him. So Richard Sherman, student of the game, he knows all of the rules, and he proved it on that play because nobody else, everyone that was watching was in shock that he just randomly wrecked the guy. He leveled him. Like, what is he thinking? Well, he's thinking on the fly, and he knows the rules. I've never seen it in football before. None of you really have. You don't, it's so rare, even though it shouldn't be. Richard Sherman, he knows his stuff. He's not only a 4.0 football student, he deserves some extra credit. He has a PhD in football. Extremely smart play. Did not break any rules. He's better than the refs when it comes to the rules almost. Anyways, football players, they're not only trained academically in the field of football, they can also be trained in other forms such as being prepared for the media, teamwork, leadership, general media and communications, decision making, all sorts of things. And so football is extremely academic. Like I said already, it is not simple. Learning football is not easy. I've struggled with it. I'm sure most Vanderbilt students would struggle with it. These are kids that got like 34s, 35s on the ACT. Football, difficult, so much to it, much more extensive, much more complicated, so many more nuances than just about every field of study that most Vanderbilt students are studying. All right. So I'll put a check mark next to the academic in nature criteria of what a college major is. And so I've gone through all 4 of them and I've given a check mark to all of them. And so looks like football is a major, but I have a little more to talk about in terms of football being qualified to be a college major. Let me summarize what I have already discussed. So I said a college major can be defined by 4 components. College majors, they should be working towards expertise in their field of study. College majors require an ample amount of time. College majors should have related career choices, and those career choices should be ones that the major prepares you either directly for or indirectly for. And college majors should be academic in nature. I explained why football satisfies all 4 of those components. And so, yeah, so far, football is really holding its own as worthy of being a college major. So now let's talk a little bit about the hypocrisy of the NCAA. There is tons I could go into on this topic. I could talk about days. I could talk for days about this, but I don't have days, so I'm just going to very quickly go through it. Let's start with the scholarship argument. So in many ways, people believe that the NCAA is justified in what I would consider the exploitation of college athletes, especially football players, because they receive scholarships. Biggest problem I see is only 55% of football players graduate. There's only a 55% graduation rate. So go to your college campus, find 2 football players. One of them probably will not graduate. That's just the numbers. The ones that do graduate, very often, they graduate with no hard skills that they attained in college. Now, this isn't their fault. It's just the fact that they spend so much time on the football field, so much time in the football classroom, that it's really difficult for them to sign up for anything that would be considered not an easy major. And I know that's mean. It's stereotyping for sure. Some football players are actually engineering majors. But for the most part, they just don't have the time to devote to some of the more rigorous majors. I mean, I personally, I'm not an engineering major. I am so busy with extracurriculars. It would be really difficult to be an engineer as a non-football player. I can only imagine what it's like as a football player or basketball player for that matter, or baseball, really any sport. But anyways, only a 55% graduation rate. The ones that do graduate often do not attain a whole lot of hard skills in their academic courses. They usually major in something like communications, sociology, general business, something down those lines. And this is definitely stereotyping. It's not all athletes, but the fact of the matter is it's too difficult for them to devote more time to other studies. And a lot of them have even been quoted saying, I wish I could study something else, but I really do not have the time. So they major in something that doesn't necessarily exclude or preclude them from any jobs, but it also, they tend not to be fully qualified for any because their majors tend to be in softer studies, like my human and organizational development one is, which a great major does not necessarily prepare you for one direct job, I guess. But anyways, back to the hypocrisy of the NCAA. The NCAA, they say it's all about education. Their argument is that football is a means for these kids to learn. And yeah, to a degree, that's most certainly true. But the truth, the real truth is, the one area in which football players are most educated in, football, they receive no credit for, none. See, I bet if you find the football player at your school with the best academic resume, find that 4.0 student who's also a football player. You ask that football player with a 4.0, have you learned more in your, psychology courses or whatever courses you're taking, or have you learned more in football in your time at this university? Every single one of those top caliber academic students would say, I have learned worlds more in football than I have in my major. and yet they don't get any academic credit for what they've learned the most in. I mean, if college is about learning and football players are learning, they're all learning. Every single one of them, all 100% of them that finish 4 years, oftentimes 4.5 or 5 if they redshirt. Why aren't they all receiving a degree? Why are they not receiving a degree that says, I learned football? Because at the end of the day, that piece of paper you receive after 4 years, that degree, it's pretty much a marker that says, I learned economics, or I learned whatever I majored in college. It's the piece of paper that says, I learned this subject. Why can't football players get one that says, I learned football? Because they most certainly learned football, and they learned it to a PhD level. So that's just a little bit on the hypocrisy of the NCAA. I could go on for days on that. There's just so much on the whole student-athlete thing, but that's for another day, not today. But let's get into all the logistics of what a football major would look like. I bet a lot of doubters out there would really be thinking about the logistics when it comes to this one. And so I say make football a major, but require football players to add a minor in a different topic. So how are the hours going to work out? I mean, this is just me speculating. I'm kind of making up stuff here. Schools would have to structure it after putting lots of thought into it, but here's what I propose. Football players during the fall football season receive 6 pass-fail credit hours, and during the spring and summer, they receive 3 pass-fail credit hours. And so in 1 year, that's 12 hours. And let's say to finish the major, you need 36 hours. So you need 3 years of football, 3 full years. If you play 4, you get 48. If you play 4.5, maybe you can even go above 48. Maybe they cap it at 48. That might be up to the school. But that's 48 hours. Generally, you need 120 to graduate. And so you're going to need to take 72 hours in arts and sciences or engineering or school of education, whatever schools your university offers. But so like I said, there isn't going to be grading in the football major. It would be ridiculous to give somebody a B- because he dropped a pass or something like that. You're not grading them based on how they play on the field. You're giving them pass-fail credit. Did they show up? And this is not an issue, trust me. Brown University, one of the greatest, most esteemed universities in the entire country, allows students to take as many courses pass-fail as they like. If a student wants to take 120 pass-fail courses, I'm pretty sure they can. I might be wrong about that. I'm pretty sure they can. And so football players, they have 48 pass-fail hours. That's not a huge deal. I know Vandy's not huge on pass-fail credits, but it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, they have 72 credit hours that will contribute to their GPA. It's not like they're going to be getting A's in football to pad the GPA. The GPA will be unaffected by this. They still have 72 hours outside of football that will determine the GPA. And like engineering, if you're a football major, you're a football player. If you graduate, you're qualified for the jobs. Engineering, a lot of the time, it doesn't matter if you have a 2.4 or 3.4. You finish the degree, and I know there's lots of grade inflation at lots of schools now, so it might be a little different. Maybe it's 2.8 or something instead of 2.4. But generally, if you get the degree, you're pretty qualified for at least a decent number of engineering jobs. Just the fact that you finished the major, the experience you gained, you learned a lot in college if you're an engineering major. So the GPA, not always the most important thing. The same would apply to football. You can make it pass-fail because if you play football for 3 or 4 years, you stay on the team, you're not cut or anything, you definitely learned a lot and you are qualified for those football jobs. And so the way you differentiate yourself, one could be on-field performance if you're trying to go to the pros. That's the way it is right now, obviously. So one is on-field performance. That's how you can really show how much you've learned and how much you can act on what you've learned. But another component is how you interview, how you carry yourself, personality. And that's generally what matters for getting a job anyways. Most employers, once you walk into the door, they don't care what your GPA is. They care if they like you. And so it doesn't really matter that I am proposing that football should be pass-fail courses. And it really has to be pass-fail because if you start adding grades, then it might get corrupt. Coaches might start giving all of their players A's so that they can do worse in their other classes. And that would just be a disaster. So 48 hours in 4 years of football, 36 required. Still need 72 hours outside of football. I'm saying you need a minor outside of football. And so most of your classes, they're going to be with other students, so normal students, non-football players. If you think it's a little ridiculous that football players have a major that other people can't do, it's not as ridiculous as you think. Vanderbilt has a music major or a music school. I cannot just randomly enroll in the music school. You have to place into it in admissions. And so you have to have the merit to get into the music school in the first place. It would be the same thing with the football school. You'd have to be recruited to get into it. Other students would not be allowed unless, of course, they walk on to the team. And so one of the huge benefits of this is that football players would actually get to focus much more on their other classes, maybe get a little bit of sleep done too, get their homework done. The way it is now, football players are really dividing their attention. They're giving kind of a partial effort to all of their courses because they're in 12, maybe even 15 hours per semester on top of their huge football commitment. And most likely these football players are living, breathing, thinking football all of the time. They just can't devote that much time to these courses. And if they do, it's difficult. They have to sacrifice sleep or something. If you give them 6 credit hours for football, that means they only have to take 6 other credit hours. Now they can really put a full effort into the classes they're taking. They don't have to half-ass them. They can truly learn the material and remember it long term. The attention won't be divided. This is entirely beneficial. There's no point in taking tons of courses and kind of trying in them and kind of learning the material. Let's let them take fewer courses in the School of Arts and Science or engineering, whatever they choose. Let them devote more time to those. They don't have to split it among 4 courses. They can split it among 2. And then get credit hours in football. It works perfectly. They might even get a few more hours of sleep. What about that? And so that pretty much sums up my whole argument. One last thing, though. It's a rebuttal that somebody messaged me on Twitter, and pretty much to paraphrase what this Twitter follower said is that football players are not forced to accept scholarships and play football, and thus the scholarship justifies the fact that they do not receive a major in football. In other words, these football players could go to school, take out loans, not be on scholarship if they choose, or they could choose not to get an education at all. And so he's saying that it's kind of justified that they do not receive a major in football for that reason. This one, though, it's an intriguing argument. I'm going to tell you why I do not think this one is valid. Colleges provide scholarships based on merit to the students that they feel benefit the school the most, or the students that have the potential to benefit the school the most in the long term. And so schools give scholarships based on demonstrated excellence, demonstrated achievement, demonstrated merit in all walks of life. And giving scholarships to schools, they're essentially competing in a competitive market to get the best talent. In this case, it's the best talent in football, but they do it in everything. Schools give scholarships in music, dance, USC, University of Southern California, has dance scholarships. Vandy has music ones. I don't think they cover full tuition, but some schools do have some that cover full tuition. A few of these people might even be in the marching band and make money in college. Music majors in general often make money in college if they are on scholarship, something football players most certainly can't do. And people receive merit scholarships for just general academics. Say somebody had tons of math awards in high school, they may receive a merit scholarship for that. So let's say someone receives a scholarship, full scholarship for math. When that student receives a scholarship in math, it's not like that student has to major in something else, say, I don't know, philosophy, economics, engineering. It's not like they have to major in something else and then devote a bajillion hours to math on the side. But that's what football players have to do. They receive a scholarship in football, and then they have to devote tons of hours to other academics on the side. Another thing, I probably should have mentioned this actually in the hypocrisy of the NCAA section, but the scholarship, and this is key. This is actually the main argument I have for my Twitter follower. I don't want to release his name, but this would be really hypocritical of the NCAA. The scholarship is not the school or the NCAA compensating the player for playing football, technically. A scholarship is so that a player can attend the school. It is purely for academic reasons, according to the NCAA. And if you argue that the scholarship is a compensation for playing football, then you're admitting that the player is being paid, pay for play, they're being paid for football, and therefore they're an athlete that plays football on the side. And so it would essentially be the same as somebody doing an off-campus job and then playing football, or football being the off-campus job, and then majoring in something else instead. And that would be fair. That would be justified, because then the football is deciding that the benefits outweigh the costs, and that person is being paid at their market value. But the way it is now, the NCAA would never admit that they're being compensated to play, and therefore you can't possibly argue that the scholarship justifies the fact that they're not getting a major in football.